Okay, so over the past 2 months, I've been making videos ranking every jutsu in each class. And today we're finally going to be finishing that series with the last remaining class, that of course being the heal types. Just before we get into it, I would like to quickly mention that this list is obviously not the objectively correct ranking. As even though I try to do a lot of research before making my choices, personal bias will always make its impact. So if there's anything you disagree with, and there probably will be, just let me know in the comments. Now, let's not waste any more time and get into it. At the very bottom of the list is the Shadow Stitching Jutsu. This technique makes you create shadow threads that damage and stun anyone in its way. By far my biggest problem with this technique is how hard it is to hit, cause from how it looks like, it seems like it shouldn't be that hard, but it is. Because for some reason the collision area of this jutsu feels much smaller than its actual sprite, meaning that you'll often feel like you should have hit it. The only way to realistically use this is in light attack combos. That being said, don't expect to get something amazing when you do connect, as you'll only get a stun and a bit of damage. I'm telling you, I have a personal vendetta against this jutsu, and if I could have it my way, this jutsu would just burn in hell. Up next on the list, we have the Paralysis Jutsu, which makes you paralyze an enemy after doing a hand seal. My personal biggest problem with this jutsu is the fact that there is no projectile, meaning that you cannot really tell where the jutsu is and if it's going to hit or not, similarly to something like Tsukuyomi. On the other hand, it has a really low cooldown of only 8 seconds. The stun lasts for a few seconds, but the jutsu just doesn't land consistently enough. And the only way to guarantee it hitting is if the enemy is just completely still. Okay, next we have the Shadow Possession Jutsu, which in terms of actually hitting the enemy is as bad as Shikamaru's other jutsu. But this time the reward at least feels somewhat adequate, as you can activate it to deal damage and then easily follow up with another combo of light attacks or whatever. The only problem is that whenever you use it in a team battle, your allies will just probably immediately interrupt it, meaning that you won't actually get anything, making this jutsu only useful in isolated 1v1s. Up next on the list we have the Byakugan. This eye technique allows you to see both your allies and enemies from greater distances and even through any obstacles, while also giving you a 1.5 attack boost. Due to the fact that the game already allows you to lock onto enemies that you cannot directly see, the vision part of this jutsu lands a bit flat for me. The attack boost is nice, but it doesn't really seem like enough to use a whole jutsu space for. It's a shame, because Byakugan is incredibly cool in the anime, but here it's just a little bit underwhelming. Okay, just before continuing, I would like to just quickly ask you if you could consider subscribing, as it would help me out a ton. We're getting closer and closer to 1000 subscribers, which would be an amazing milestone. And thanks so much to everyone who's already subscribed. Anyway, let's move on with the list. Up next on the list is the Heavy Boulder Jutsu. It makes you charge your opponent, slowing them down and shortening their jump if it connects for the next 10 seconds. Maybe this jutsu would be higher if there wasn't a much better alternative in the heal class, but there simply is. This technique is also not that easy to hit, and the added effects just aren't really all that worth it. Next up is Nervous System Rupture, which makes you launch at the enemy, dealing 10% damage and reversing their controls for around 5 seconds. Even though the effect of this jutsu is a bit annoying at first, experienced players will not have much of an issue ignoring it, meaning that this is basically just an okay damage dealer. The tracking isn't bad, but the damage isn't really all that much compared to other jutsu in this class. Moving swiftly on, we have Cherry Blossom Clash, which has you smash the ground, dealing damage to anyone around. This jutsu isn't necessarily bad, as it has some positive effects that come along with it, such as disabling the enemy's sub for a bit, but it can also be a little bit frustrating trying to land it. The tracking on it doesn't always make much sense either, as you can be locked onto someone but the jutsu won't go after them, making it feel a bit inconsistent. Plus there's just a better alternative to this jutsu that we'll get onto later. In the next spot, we have a little version of the previous jutsu, Crimson Drizzle. To be completely honest, I can't really tell you the difference between this and the previous entry, apart from the fact that one is a bit smaller and seals away the enemy's sub for longer. I just prefer using Crimson Drizzle for whatever reason. It feels weirdly more consistent. No insane explanation here, just kind of my gut feeling. Following up is Particle Style Atomic Dismantling Jutsu, Pillar, which makes you create a beam in front of you that you direct from left to right, dealing damage to anyone caught. This jutsu is just okay in my opinion. The damage isn't super high and it also isn't the easiest to hit, but you can get multiple targets. The best part is probably the fact that it breaks things like Sand Shield and Susanoo armor, making it a decent counter pick. Moving on, next we have Mind Transmission Jutsu. This technique has you create a ball of mental energy that tracks the enemy, putting them into a trance if it connects. Upon second input, you can force the opponent to put a paper bomb on themselves that explodes, dealing damage. This jutsu actually deals quite a lot of damage, and it isn't all that hard to hit. The biggest problem though is the fact that your teammates will often interrupt it before you can activate the second phase, basically rendering it useless in teamfights. You have to make sure no one is around you when you're using this, and that just doesn't happen all that often. Up next we have Murderous Bonash. This jutsu makes you throw out 2 spikes that target the opponent, dealing damage and draining their health for the next 5 seconds. Even though this jutsu recently got a buff, it still feels a little bit underwhelming to me. I know that the health draining property isn't super noticeable, but it just seems like I'm throwing a kunai. The jutsu isn't particularly hard to hit though, as even if you miss, it teleports to a different spot and gets redirected, making it much easier to land. Let's continue on to our next entry, Lava Style Dissolving Jutsu. This technique makes you spit out 5 large balls of lava that create a pool of lava on the ground, which not only slows down enemies but also damages them and lowers their defense. My biggest problem with this is just how long it takes for the lava balls to fall down, as they are incredibly slow, making it pretty easy to dodge them. The jutsu is still viable in base and flag battle, but hitting the right spots isn't super easy. So you'll have to learn how to properly do that if you want to get the most out of this technique. Moving down the list we have Tsukuyomi, which puts the targeted enemy into a genjutsu, not allowing them to move and dealing damage after a few seconds. This jutsu's biggest problem is that similarly to Amaterasu, you can basically only hit stationary targets with it, meaning that it's not exactly a reliable attack. Once you do hit it, it's actually pretty good, as you can chain it with light attacks, but yeah, you definitely have to be patient with this one. Okay, let's move on to the next entry, 8 trigrams Airpal. This jutsu makes you release an invisible wind projectile that upon hitting the enemy damages them and seals away their ninjutsu for about 8 seconds. Even though this jutsu doesn't exactly deal massive damage, the effect it provides makes it very useful. It's basically like a ranged version of Chakra Scalpel. The tracking also isn't bad, and added with the invisibility, it isn't at all hard to hit this jutsu pretty consistently. Moving down, we have Earth Style Superlight and Boulder Jutsu, which gives you and your allies in a certain area the following effects: boosts movement speed, attack tracking ability, evasion distance, and shortened substitution and jutsu cooldown times. This jutsu doesn't only come handy in flag battle, but can be surprisingly good in teamfights since you can give your allies quite the advantage. Next is Earth Style Super Weighted Boulder Jutsu, which does the exact same as the previous jutsu, just this time it decreases the before mentioned stats of enemies. These 2 entries could be interchangeable, I just think the debuffs are a bit more valuable for whatever reason. The next entry on the list belongs to Summoning Slug, which as far as summoning jutsu goes, actually isn't too bad. It recovers your health quickly and stays around for a decent time of 15 seconds. That being said, I mainly stick to using it in combat and flag battle, as that's where you will get the most out of it by far. Continuing on, we have Cellular Activation, which rapidly heals you over the next 7 seconds after activation. This is by far the best jutsu in the game for healing the user, as using this alongside a healing tag can basically get you to full health, making it very hard to kill you. That being said, it obviously doesn't help out your allies much, apart from keeping you alive that is, but still, you'd ideally like to heal your teammates too. Moving down the list, we have the Palm Sage Jutsu, which makes you put your hands together, healing not only yourself but also your allies in range for the next 7 seconds, as long as nothing interrupts you. This jutsu can actually provide a big amount of health back to everyone. You just have to keep your allies close and make sure nobody hits you, which is obviously easier said than done. It would probably be a bit higher if it wasn't for Ino's healing technique, which is very similar but better, I think. Following on is Chakra Scalpel, which is a close range attack that apart from dealing damage also seals away the target's ninjutsu for the next 10 seconds. The reason why I have this above 8 trigrams Airpal is the fact that even though it's close range, it's incredibly easy to hit. The tracking and the cover distance honestly couldn't be much better, meaning that you will be landing this more often than not. It also deals a bit more damage and seals away the jutsu just for a little longer. No incredible difference, but still. Following up, we have Limbo Border Jail, which creates 4 invisible clones that you can either send at the enemy or that protect you when you are getting attacked. When the clones connect with the enemy, they will barrage them with strikes. This is a great way to sneakily protect objectives, as enemies will not anticipate you being surrounded by the clones. That being said, I would probably stick to mainly using them to protect yourself, as sending them at the enemy can be a little bit inconsistent. Moving down the list, we have Green Rain Ground Hold. It makes you throw down kunai on the floor, which create half a sphere, inside of which both you and your allies receive healing, reduced ninjutsu cooldowns, and resistance. Recently, you also get super armor while this jutsu is active. This is kind of like an upgraded version of the Slug, as the area is bigger and even though it doesn't last as long, blocking it around 10 seconds, it just comes with much more utility. Let's move on to our next entry, Strength of 100 Flower Cannon. This jutsu makes you release a burst of healing chakra, healing yourself and buffing your allies in the process. It grants you and your allies increased ninjutsu power and lower cooldowns. This jutsu can often go unnoticed as it doesn't do anything super obvious, but the buff has quite a wide area, meaning that you can basically instantly give all of your teammates a huge advantage in a team fight, which, when it comes down to it, is exactly what you want from a healer. Following up, we have Truth Seeker Orbs Cycle, which shrouds you in the Truth Seeker Orb, protecting you from almost all damage for 5 seconds. Upon second activation, you fire off 6 smaller orbs at a targeted enemy, dealing damage and resetting the enemy's ninjutsu and ninja tool stocks and slowing their recovery rate for 5 seconds. This is the perfect jutsu for protecting yourself, and you can even contest flags and bases with it. The second part is also a pretty reliable damage dealer. The only problem with this jutsu is the fact that you can't do much while in the orb, meaning your teammates will have to survive without you. Moving down the list, we have Strength of 100 Hard Light, which simply gives you super armor for 8 seconds, while knocking back enemies if they are close to you while you activate this technique. This is in my opinion a pretty underrated jutsu, as getting 8 seconds where you can basically do what you want as a healer is incredibly valuable. Not only will you be able to use healing tags and the second ninjutsu you have to heal your team, but also get a bit of damage in yourself. Continuing on, we have Sage Art Shadow Style Thunder Blast, which first makes you charge up chakra, releasing it in the form of purple lightnings to not only damage the caught enemies but also stun them. You can charge this jutsu to up to 3 stages, and with each stage the range increases and you also get additional effects. It is also important to mention that you get super armor while charging. This jutsu is very good for a base battle, as you can easily deal a bunch of damage and stun a bunch of opponents at once. Sure, you'll receive some damage back, but I think it's most definitely worth it. Further down the list, we have AD God's Vacuum Fist, which makes you create fists in the air that pummel the opponent. This is simply a very reliable close range attack that heal types have at their disposal, as you get super armor while performing it, meaning that it basically cannot be interrupted. Plus it also holds the enemy in place for quite a while, and combined with the good damage, you have an attack that's always useful. Let's now look at the next entry, Heavenly Foot of Pain. It has you jump into the air, do a front flip and smash the ground with your left heel, dealing damage and knocking every enemy in the area back without them being able to substitute. Even though this jutsu recently got a bit nerfed, it's still definitely the best option out of the smash the ground jutsu, simply because of the tracking and the area of effect. It's definitely the most consistent of the 3 and amazing in team fights. Up next we have Water Style Water Pillar, which makes you create a large spinning pillar of water that pushes any enemy in proximity away while dealing 10% damage, and does not allow anyone to step onto it who isn't on your team. This is basically the heal class Sand Shield with the added damage. As expected, it's really good at protecting bases and flags, but there are certainly many counters to it, so just keep an eye out for that when using it. Continuing on, we have Mind Transmission Palm Sage Jutsu, which has you put your hands together and heal everyone on your team across the entire map for the next 7 seconds. In terms of pure healing, this jutsu offers the biggest amount of potential health back. That being said, you are completely immobile while using it, meaning that you need to fully stay out of the battle in order to not be interrupted, making it not a super fun move to use. Otherwise, it's obviously very good, as long as you have teammates that you can actually rely on. Following up, we have Cellular Extraction Jutsu, which simply heals you and your allies for 30%. As simple as this jutsu is, it's still one of the most reliable heals in the entire game, as it has a really short activation time, good range, it removes negative effects and has a pretty low cooldown. It's basically like another but better healing tag, which is exactly what a lot of heal types need in their arsenal. Up next, we have probably the best offensive jutsu for heal types in the game, Yasaka Beat. It creates half a Susanoo, which then throws a beat at the targeted enemy, dealing a lot of damage and creating an explosion. This is everything you could want from an offensive jutsu, as you're invulnerable while using it and it has amazing tracking and damage. To be honest, even outside of this class, this is one of the best offensive jutsus out there, and that's why it's so high on this list. And at the top of the list, we have 6 Path Chakra Rebirth, which makes you create a flash of energy, healing all of your allies for 30%, including you, and even reviving recently fallen teammates, while knocking back enemies. This is currently, in my opinion, the best healing jutsu in the game due to its recent buff, as now the area of effect is better and the recovery amount bigger. It also boosts your allies' defense, just the ultimate support jutsu for the middle of a battle. And that's the last jutsu. As I said at the beginning, this is definitely not the definitive list. And I by no means think that you can't use jutsu at the lower end of the list with great success. You definitely can. This is just based off of my own personal experience, plus the research I did in preparation for this video. In any case, let me know in the comments what you guys thought, and as always, I will see you all soon. Bye!